As another example, when President Kennedy came into office, a good friend of mine was the head of the, what I refer to as the PSYOP briefing team. PSYOP is a single integrated operations plan. That's the U.S. plan for nuclear attack. And they went in to brief the president. And he dismissed them saying, "No, thank you. If it comes to that, I will have failed." Now here's the commander-in-chief, not briefed on the operational plan, doesn't even want to know about it because if it comes to that, he will have failed. And you can see that same feeling reflected in 1979, I believe it is, in Geneva, when his national security advisor, George Bundy, was giving a talk. And he says right in the middle of the talk, he's talking about it, and the idea that, you know, nuclear war would be the greatest failure of U.S. policy. You know, so you have this image of a total failure. Well, you don't prepare for it. You know,
the surest way to fail.
Yes, but you know, until President Carter came to office, since that time, and I believe I'm correct, no president was briefed on the nuclear plan in detail. Now, the problem with a lot of these concepts that we're talking about is that they're really mind-boggling. Now, they're unbelievable. The idea that, well, we see the Soviets as we want to see them, not as they are, even though it's there, you know, is hard to believe.
It's even harder. It's even harder when you realize that at some level of our establishment, we know what you have been saying, General Sejna. We know what you have been saying. You cannot be the only people in Washington who know this. I mean, you've been here 20 years.
No, it's the best kept secret in the world. You know, everybody knows it. You know, but nobody wants to do anything about it.
But it is really very difficult, you know, change the American mind. You look at the other factors. Many people believe, even one general told me, if we help Russian to build the industry, feed them more, they will stay home. I mean, this is tragedy, because since Peter the Great, he was talking, move the Russian border to the warm ocean, which is Indian Ocean. He didn't have the possibility, you know, to do that, like Gorbachev has the possibility. So you have many theories which Russian dropped to the United States or to whole world, and people love to accept it. It is unbelievable. But if such a general which I met, who's supposed to be one of the toughest, and he tell you the story, I didn't believe it. I thought it is joke. But when I tried to explain to him he's wrong, he was mad. So how you can change the mind of most Americans,
or the leadership of America,
you know?
Let me ask you about your book, America the Vulnerable, the threat of chemical biological warfare. Now, we got as far as discussing what happens after the first strike against the United States, movement of Soviet troops to take over what is left. Do they take over with CB, and are they doing this simultaneously in Europe?
I want to just, if I may edit one thing, first of all, to support Joe, what he said about the first strike, if they do that and when they will do that. It is again in this document when they mention the fight for peace, they say the way to the peace will be not straight up, it will be like zigzag. And the war will probably start when the zigzag will be completely down, when everybody, it will be not hot situation, when everybody think, now we are the most friendly, Soviets and United States.
Don't you have some documents that say the war will start
it is here,
when there is
exactly
peace?
In this document. I just want to support that what Joe said. They go and sign the treaty with Finland and same time they attack them, you know. So what I want to tell you, nobody has experience about deception and disinformation like Soviets and communists, because it is natural. The Soviets are absolutely paranoid. You cannot stay with them 1 hour if they wouldn't discuss deception and disinformation, not just against the United States, but against own people. And if the communists tell you this is blue, if you are lucky it is maybe gray, but they never tell you exactly what they mean. So we have to have every time this in mind if we talk to them. And now, how they will control the country? I think, again, you must look at the communist system. First of all, as I said before, the Soviets never worked from one day to other day, like we do in United States, the policy. They always analyze the country, analyze the region, what to do that, and they always build, as they call it, third power. First power are the government, second, which maybe will replace him, third power are forces, individuals, which will be used if the revolution situation and war situation will come. These people are there, and believe me, if you have situation as Joe explained, they will buy chemical weapons, drop biological weapons, and so on. So you don't need too many crazy people, leaders, and some organization, and we have enough in United States, who give them support, who will believe. I tell you, if you look at the TV serial America, people criticize it, they make fun about that, but there were very good statements. If the guy said, look, the KGB guy, by the way, they were presented like almost like angels. It is saying like Shevaradze said, Marshal Akhramyev, chief of Soviet General Staff, is the most peaceful marshal in the history. I mean, this is such a joke, I cannot believe it. But the KGB guy told the other guy, he said, you lost America a long time before we step in. And that's the problem. This is what we have to have the mind. Preparation for sabotage, preparation of these people, preparation some correspondence and so.
You're talking about the Spetsnaz troops are already here?
Spetsnaz, you know, Joe said through the air, from the ocean, they can, look how many they have Spetsnaz today. It is, they have already airborne troops, Spetsnaz, strategic airborne troops, Spetsnaz, which they didn't have before. So what for they have all these things, you know? And nobody wants to hear it. It is impossible. If they tell them some targets are will be destroyed by nuclear weapons, some by sabotage, some of them by both, which they are so important. But we don't want to hear it. We don't want to discuss these things because we believe what they tell us, you know, and it is really tragedy. So thanks, because you try to make people understand something.
Getting back to America the Vulnerable, would you like to state the thesis of this book?
I'd be happy to. Let me begin by saying that nuclear war is certainly an atrocious subject. You know, it is not a pleasant subject. However bad as it is, it's not as bad a subject as chemical warfare. You know, chemical is even worse, and as bad as that is, biological is still worse. The chemical and the biological threats are probably the most underrated threat in existence today, the one which we ignore at our own peril the most because we really don't want to deal with it. It is a nasty subject. Nobody wants to address it, perhaps because they see it as one of those too hard to handle problems. This is why my co-author Neil Livingston and I wrote this book, America the Vulnerable, and the title tells it. We are extremely vulnerable. We pay no attention to the threat at all for all practical purposes.
You also made clear in this article in Global Affairs that we are already under attack and have been since almost 1962 of chemical warfare.
That's true.
And the Soviet warfare of drugs in this nation, directly conceived by Khrushchev. It is a very staggering and startling message that both of you present in this joint presentation on drugs, narcotics, and national security. So chemical warfare is upon us.
Yeah, and it was really in the process of writing that book and looking at the drugs and narcotics as a form of chemical warfare that led to that article and the development of that material. The problem in the biological and chemical warfare is we don't want anything to do with it. And
it's immoral.
It's immoral, it's witchcraft, but it's something you have a hard time fighting. I mean, it doesn't go bang. It's invisible. You may not know who's employed it or when. And how do you defend against it? If you put people into suits, they can't fight. We went out of the business in 1969 in response to a lot of Soviet propaganda and disinformation, in response to a lot of internal efforts in arms control and unilateral disarmament. The President unilaterally renounced biological warfare in 1969 in December, followed that with toxin warfare in March of 1970, and the military disarmed in those areas and also, for all practical purpose, chemical warfare in the early 70s. Matter of fact, the Army even decided to disband the Chemical Corps, and they would have, except they found out it had been created by an act of Congress, and to get it disbanded, they had to go back to Congress, and that proved to be a very embarrassing thing to do at that time, because all of a sudden there were a lot of reports coming out of the Soviet Union and the Middle East that said that the Soviet Union had a tremendous chemical warfare capability. And of course, it would have been embarrassing to ask Congress to disband the Chemical Corps exactly that time. So it wasn't disbanded. But the United States did go out of the business. A few people tried to get us back in the late 70s. They weren't listened to very much. After we saw the Soviets using chemical agents in Afghanistan and Southeast Asia, and coupled with the defense buildup under President Reagan and Secretary of Defense Weinberger, the budget did increase in the area, and some efforts to improve were made, but not very many. In looking at the chemical warfare and biological warfare problem, I think the first thing that one has to do is recognize that the attention that we have had on it, first of all, there is none on biological. There hasn't been any. We have no defense. It's outlawed by an arms control treaty, and therefore, there's no threat. In the chemical area, we are looking at one situation, basically, which is a war in Europe, the use of chemical weapons against the battlefield, and the use of chemical weapons, which I would describe as being classical chemical weapons, the ones that were developed during World War II and immediately thereafter and quite a while before. Ones that people have heard about: mustard, phosgene, nerve agent, those types of things. That's a small piece of the problem, because if you look at what the Soviets have been doing, their interests have been much broader. They've encompassed the use of drugs and narcotics, as we mentioned in this book. They envision the use of really mind-controlled drugs, drugs to debilitate thinking, drugs, chemicals for use in assassinations, in use in political warfare, in use in sabotage and intelligence operations. A wide variety of things, not just use against the tactical battlefield, strategic operations. Now, the thing that makes it also frightening, and it is frightening, is that beginning in the early 70s, the actual beginning can be tracked back to the late 50s, but for all practical purposes, it's really the early 70s when genetic engineering became feasible, when people began to be able to take a gene from one organism, extract it, and insert it into another organism. You then had the development of monoclonal antibodies, where you can take organisms and cause them to produce reactions that you can then use to create chemicals that are monoclonal, in a sense. You have had a revolution out of these basic developments in molecular biology, a revolution which has encompassed all of the life sciences. It is widely recognized to be so. It is called by that name. Some people refer to it as genetic engineering, molecular biology, gene splicing, biotechnology. Everybody's heard some of those words. It's not something in the laboratory. We had one of the largest expansions in new industries in Wall Street in the early 1980s, actually beginning in 1979. It was all focused on the new biotechnologies. You can't pick up a newspaper any week now without hearing something or reading something, about some new hormone or progress being made in this area. It is just tremendous in terms of changing our appreciation of life sciences. We have focused all our attention on the peaceful uses, the medical uses, the engineering, the commercial uses. There's been no attention in the West, for all practical purposes, on its use in chemical or biological warfare. And it has all the potential in those areas as it does in the commercial area. It revolutionizes the area. So you have changes that are so significant and qualitatively and quantitatively significant that it totally changes your concepts of what can be done. We think about a nerve agent as being toxic. Well, you can talk about new agents now, or organisms, either one, that are, to the extent you could compare them, let's say 10 orders of magnitude more potent. Now, that's mind-boggling. Not only that, but they don't have to kill somebody, they can debilitate him. And your best military operation really is not to kill people. You want to kill a few people. The person that can press a button in a command control center and send a missile flying, you'd like to kill him. But most of the people, if you disable them, if you disorient them, you louse up the whole military operation. It takes much more effort to take care of a casualty than a dead man, for example. And if you disorient the thinking of military commanders, of military leaders, of political leaders, you can make it impossible to start a war. So you have something that is not a typical weapon in terms of what we're used to thinking about dealing with. Because now we have to think about things that are used in peacetime, that'll be used before a war starts, and it can be used to neutralize forces. In military exercises in the 1970s, late 1970s, where an exercise is something where you go according to a script to test out procedures or plans, and you sort of make up scenarios. We have seen scenarios where the Soviets have used chemicals to put entire cities to sleep.
You've seen them?
In the scenarios, yes. And what a great way to fight a war in a city. Put the city to sleep, come in, seize the facilities, they're all under control. In Afghanistan, there were a number of agents used that we don't know what they were. That's part of the problem with Afghanistan. Data collection, understanding what was happening. It looks like it was a testing ground for many sophisticated agents. One of them has been reported as an agent that put people to sleep so fast that they were frozen in position before they knew they were under attack. That's been reported by several different sources. That is of tremendous significance in military assault planning. If you have, a gun that can project a gas that can do something like that, much more effective than bullets. But it would, what does this do to a defending force? Well, it throws you into a tizzy. You don't know what to do. And of course, this is one of the reasons that we have not been addressing these things. We don't know what to do. We don't want to come to grips with them.
Oh.
There's something we don't like.
Has America been put to sleep by the wave of drugs that the Chinese and Soviets have already sent ahead of war?
Drugs is a tremendously good example. And in talking about drugs, we don't want to get the impression that we know who's doing what necessarily. What we're talking about is really what the Soviets have done, and with first-hand sources, and the Chinese, and why this problem is not just a mere social problem or the result of a few Latin American drug traffickers. It's a nice way to characterize it, but that's not what caused the problem to grow. Mao Zedong back in 1928 started the use of drugs as a political weapon, not to raise money, but political weapon to subdue the enemy, actually the Chinese, in his advance. And he referred to it as indigenous chemical warfare. It's a very insidious type of chemical warfare in which the victim is poisoning himself. The Chinese have been for a long time, of course, well aware of the use of opium and narcotics in this way. It goes back to the Opium War and its use at that time. But In terms of its use really as part of the communist movement, it really starts, I think, effectively around 1949 when the Chinese communists took over the mainland, and one of the first things they did was to nationalize all the poppy fields and turn the opium, the narcotics, into a weapon. Initial target was the surrounding area, Japan, and of course U.S. forces in the area. There was data on major planning efforts in the early 50s that turned this into a political weapon. It was used heavily against U.S. forces, it was used heavily against Japan. Those uses were identified by U.S. intelligence under the key spearhead at that time was the director of narcotics, a person named Harry Anslinger, who actually provided a lot of the data and made it available to the UN. In the process of looking at as drugs and narcotics as a form of chemical warfare and really sabotaging society from within in writing this book is when it struck me that this was a form of chemical warfare and we needed to really look at it in detail, and this is when I started talking about it with General Sejna, and the data that he then added into the discussion from his first-hand knowledge as head of or as Secretary of the Defense Council and First Secretary at and Chief of Staff of the Ministry of Defense is just I don't know what you call it, mind-boggling or what, but it's frightening. You have basically the use of the drugs by the Chinese against U.S. military forces as a military weapon during the Korean War. The Soviets learn about this and study it and decide it is a very effective weapon and one that should be applied against the West. They then spend the years training their intelligence cadres to do it, developing the strategy for the covert marketing of the drugs. They send out the intelligence forces to learn about their manufacture, to learn all the West knows about it, and then in 1960 they go into action. And the first thing they do is in setting up Cuban intelligence and counterintelligence, they assign to Cuba as one of their first mission the production and distribution of drugs and narcotics into the United States, and Czechoslovakia was of assistance in helping to establish the trafficking routes through Mexico and Canada. At approximately the same time, they also set up distribution nets throughout Southeast Asia through Indonesia. The next year, this expands, and not only are we talking about the production in Cuba and distribution out of Cuba, but the infiltration of other Latin American drug networks in 1961 to the establishment of drug networks in Latin America in 1962. 1962, you also have then all the Warsaw Pact countries brought together and the strategy explained openly to the key strategic leadership, where we're talking about the use of drugs to destroy the society, to weaken the military, to attack the youth, primary targets being the school system because that's where the future leaders are.
Wasn't that Khrushchev's idea in the beginning?
That was Khrushchev's talk.
I'm wondering if you ever heard him speak about that.
Oh yes, it is exactly what, Joe, I have to call you Dr. Douglas because it will be on TV. It is exactly what he said. I was on that meeting when Khrushchev first time said, we are stupid, Chinese are much more smarter. We have to not just destroy the society, especially as Joe said, the young generation and so-called the elite, means the scientists, engineers, professors, and so and so, because it is the best thing to destroy the society. We have to have also enough money for our intelligence services. The capitalists will even pay our espionage in United States. So since there, the other leaders were also, of course, involved, and Czechoslovakia, because I would say better industry, biology and everything than, let's say, Bulgaria, Romania, was involved from the beginning in this business. I was present when was made deal with Raul Castro when he visited Czechoslovakia was made agreement, established the center in Cuba. So this go a long way back, and the most important real was the really year 62 in communist country. And I think Joe is right, it is part of the war. It is right there. The society is destroyed without rockets.
It's been highly successful in the United States.
And they still make money on that. You know, that's
tremendous money.
That's the tragedy.
Money for arms.
And again, we are look at it in the United States just simply criminal business. You know, if you talk to some people, oh no, Soviets cannot be involved because it is impossible. It is immoral. You know. Khrushchev said everything what helped communism and destroy capitalism is moral on that meeting. Some guys have at least little objection, like Hungarians, they were worried what will happen, peace coexistence, but everything what helped communism is moral. And we never see it like this.
It's very hard to understand why we can't see it too. It's easy and hard. It's easy in the sense that we don't want to see it because it would interrupt détente. It would interrupt arms control, and we don't want to do anything that would harm that process.
We cannot make them mad, Russians. It will be really bad.
Yes. But in terms of how we can't see it, the one thing over the past 5 years that we have seen is the active involvement of Cuba. We've had the communist officials, the party officials, Air Force officials, Cuban intelligence officials, all of which who have said, talked about their involvement. Well, when you understand that Cuba is under the control of the Soviet Union, and specifically since 1970, their intelligence service has been under the thumb, direct control of the Soviet Union. If they're doing it, the people behind it are the Soviet Union. Now, you don't blame Cuba, you blame the person that's pulling the strings, that's running the operation, that's the Soviet Union. The same is true in Nicaragua. And you look at the sudden emergence of the terrorism, the guns and the butter, and the guns' connection to the drugs. Well, one has to recognize, where did the terrorism come from? Who's been training the terrorists?
Well, the drugs themselves seem to create this illusory consciousness we have, as well as a consciousness of denial, denial of the reality that we're facing.
Yes.
And you see that in children under the influence of marijuana or alcohol. And then you have the generation of cocaine users in the upper class. And it's, again, the chemical itself produces the denial.
It helped them a lot. First of all, destroyed the society, as Joe said before the war will start. And you have articles where they say, for example, some weapons, biological weapons, how they slow down thinking of the officer. And the officers, if you slow down his decision-making process or decision couple minutes, it is too late. Secondly, it helped them make money. We pay them for the operation. Third, it helped them to know many politicians, especially if you look at Latin America and other countries, who are corrupted by drugs, to control them. So there are many ways which Soviets use drugs, and it helped them. And as you see, it is again integrate strategy, integrate policy. They don't do things, okay, today we will do these things and maybe tomorrow. No, it is directed to same strategic goal. If it is drugs or missiles or Star War in Soviet Union, same direction.
Let me expand on one element there that General Sejna mentioned, and that's the corruption that accompanies the drugs and narcotics. The drugs and narcotics problem itself is bad enough and effective enough as a weapon, as you point out. But when you look at it, there's one that's equally bad, if not worse, and that's the corruption that goes along with it. When the Soviets went into the infiltration of Latin American networks, one of the objectives is to understand who has been corrupted by the drugs and narcotics. Because by understanding this, they then have the wherewithal for political blackmail. Now, in 1967, in following the people that have been corrupted, as General Sejna described to me before, the Czechoslovakian intelligence put people into two categories. One, people in positions of power, and people who could become in positions of power in the future. And just in positions of power in 1967, the Czech intelligence had active dossiers on over 2,000 people in Latin America, say 2,400 or 500. Now, the intelligence services among the Warsaw Pact are coordinated. So when you start adding things up, you have to add that to that the files of the Bulgarians, the Hungarians, the Germans, who are also very active, the Cubans, and the Soviets. There's 5 other nations involved. And in addition to Latin America, you extend the same thing to Canada, to the United States, to Western Europe, and other countries of the world. So you're talking about the blackmail potential, the use of witting or unwitting agents in the many tens of thousands of individuals, a tremendously high number. There was a member of the French Communist Party that was coming into Canada, who was apprehended bringing in heroin in, I believe it was the early 70s or something like that. And he was sent back to France, put on trial. One of the newspapers that was reporting on it indicated that when he came into France, he had a list with him of 2,000 corrupted people in the movie, the government, intelligentsia, what have you, areas.
All connected with drugs?
All connected with the drugs. So we're talking about, that number confirms, basically the same order as the Czech number. So you're talking about a lot of people. And then you ask, well, what effect does this have on what we've seen take place at the United Nations, or the difficulties in working out relations with our Latin American friends that sometimes you wonder, why they're biting the hand that feeds them, or other countries around the world. You have an enormous potential of corruption, blackmail, that just feeds into the Soviet apparatus, which is geared to take advantage of those types of things. So you have, the debilitating effect on society, the alienation of youth, the destruction of individuals, and incidentally, the research objective is not just something that gives you a high quickly, but something that destroys your mind on a permanent basis. The funding of all other intelligence agents' operations with the income, and then the corruption that goes along with it. And you have just a tremendously effective weapon. And you have to ask, why aren't we paying attention to it?
And again, you are in the West thinking. It was confiscated, I don't know how long, how many kilograms cocaine in, I believe it was in Holland, on the Soviet ship. And a few months ago in Middle East, one Arab country, they confiscate, I don't know how many tons marijuana on the Soviet ship. And the Soviet captain said, I don't know how and who put it in. I mean, this is joke, and we believe it, because the ships go from Afghanistan. He doesn't know a couple tons who put it to his ship, and we believe it. We still believe they don't do that. Somebody else put it there.
There is circulating in the United States information on AIDS and pointing in the direction of the World Health Organization, as well as Soviet agents introducing AIDS into this country through various experiments. Have you heard anything about that?
No. I've thought a great deal about that point, and certainly one of the things that strikes me, well, is, if they could have done it, they would have done it. Only, however, if they had, in their own mind, the belief that it wouldn't be attributed back to them, that they'd get away with it, and if they had their own cure so that they weren't, subject to the same problem themselves, because otherwise it's going to come back and bite them as well. There's been a lot of people that wanted to talk about the Soviets as having been responsible, and I guess the two of the types of things that would make you want to raise your eyebrows would be, number one, the strong propaganda campaign that they've been under or have been implementing, saying that the U.S. was responsible for it.
Exactly. That is very suspicious.
And also, and we won't know this for several years, but whether or not they don't come down with it themselves, which they should, because they have troops in Africa by the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. So they should have the problem themselves too. If they don't, then you have to be very suspicious. But the idea that anybody could have created this thing as well as it did and to do what it does is a little bit steep. You'd want very good evidence to suggest that was the case, and to go off accusing the Soviets of doing that without such evidence only makes you a part of what I'd say is bad anti-communism and is self-defeating for your own interests and working to the benefit of the Soviets.
Definitely.
I just want to add one thing. After we published few articles about the drugs, Soviets attack us few times. The last article in party newspaper even rehabilitate me. They give me back the rank general before they call me just criminal. So I'm very happy because I got it back. But if Soviets, if it really doesn't hurt them, they wouldn't mention it. You know, once you do something and it really hurt them, they go back to counterattack to kill you. And there I would like to show you also typical deception from Soviet Union. To prove it is not true, they started campaign after these articles. They have themselves drug problem. They make some trials because people use poppy seeds. So how they can do that in United States if they have own problem and they don't know really what to do that? Now if you look at it, first of all, if you go to Ukraine, the poppy seed is national food. Everybody make cakes and everything. Nobody never arrested them. If you go to Soviet Asia, it is like in Turkey or everywhere they smoke hashish since they exist. But nobody never paid them attention until some people start to talk about Soviet involvement in drugs. And again, you can see our people like they are happy. Why you tell us they are involved in drugs if they have own problem? You know? And this is typical example how Soviets work and convince you are absolutely wrong, and people buy it.
You raised the question of how we do such things or do certain things in U.S. policy, and here is a tremendously good example of the problems we have and the inconsistencies in our own way of our own policy. And this is an example, two of them that I'll give, that again, you couldn't have designed a better example. It is so good that it's just beautiful. The Bulgarians are, of course, tremendously under the thumb of the Soviets, and what they do is in response to the Soviet dictates, and we've known that for years. In 1971, by which time we knew that Bulgarian intelligence was active in drugs, there was a defector from Bulgarian intelligence who acknowledged they were dealing with drugs, that the purpose was to undermine the social stability in the West, and that they were directed by the Soviet Union in the effort, confirming what General Sejna has described. Notwithstanding this, in 1971, U.S. Customs and the Drug Enforcement Agency, that time the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, went to the Bulgarian officials and proposed to them that the U.S. Customs teach the Bulgarians techniques for catching drug trafficking across their borders so that the Bulgarians could help us stop the drug traffickers.
Can you believe it?
We instituted the program and we trained them in 1973, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It wasn't until 1981 that people in the customs and the DEA stood up and said, gee, we don't think we've been getting the total support of the Bulgarian officials. This past year, when in the process of Jack Matlock's hearings for Ambassador of the Soviet Union, some friends asked questions about our training of East European officials in drug catching techniques. And it turns out that we also train, I think it was the Hungarians, the Yugoslavs, and maybe it was the East Germans in the same techniques. Now, of course, you wonder why we say there's no communist conspiracy, or the State Department says there's no communist conspiracy. It's only the criminals, the social problems, and the Latin American traffickers who, independent on their own, are doing these things. That's kind of embarrassing to say that the Soviets are involved, or the Bulgarians, or the Hungarians, while at the same time you're teaching those officials the techniques of your own people to stop the trafficking.
How to pass the control. We are super.
Another example. In March this year, the State Department Division of International Narcotics, under congressional direction, published a report on international drug trafficking, which is now to be reviewed by Congress in the process of reviewing foreign aid. The idea, well, we don't want to aid a country that's not doing their part to stop the drug trafficking. Well, the report has two sections. One section talks about the people who are, countries who are, the countries where a lot of trafficking is involved. And I'm avoiding the country being involved, but a lot of trafficking is involved, Colombia, Cuba, Nicaragua, what have you. The second section is involved with the countries that are producers. For example, Bolivia, Burma, Thailand. In that second group of countries, not one single communist nation is listed as a producing country. Not one.
It's outrageous.
In the first section, the only ones that are listed are the ones that are so well known that they can't afford not to mention them. Bulgaria, Cuba, Nicaragua. And in each case they say, gee, we have some reports that some people are doing this, but the country itself isn't involved, and the country's actively working to try and stop it. Now that's the way in which the U.S. government looks at it.
It has to look at it that way because if it will see the reality, it'll have to do something about it. And all my life I have met people. If you present the truth, they reject it solely on the basis that if they would accept it, they would have to change their life around, they would have to make some sacrifices, give up something, take a stand, and do something other than follow their materialistic goals and pleasure cult and so forth.
That's right. And it's particularly the materialistic goals that are hitting this. If you look at the reasons that we have stopped calling a spade in terms of China, that we have stopped telling people what's happening, several researchers independently have said it was done because people wanted to reestablish economic relations with China.
Capitalists want to make money.
If you look at the reason for arms control, now it's not any great, there are some people that are seriously interested in arms control, but the main forces that are pushing it are the forces that recognize it's embarrassing to work out economic relations if you can't say that, well, yeah, they're okay because the government is negotiating arms control. The one justifies the other.
Plus it is other things. If you confess today it is true, you must also agree you are stupid because you didn't know that before. And not many people like to do that.
That's right. Once you've committed your ego to a position.
That's right. Old ideas die hard. And there's nothing so hard to kill as an unsuccessful program.
Except in the Soviet Union, where they can kill off the guys who thought it up.
That was one of the lessons I learned in the short years I was in the government. And that if you have an unsuccessful program, you keep pouring money into it year after year to make it successful. If you have a successful program, it ends. Nobody wants a successful program.
General Sejna, our president has recently pinpointed what he has called Red Shield, the Soviet Star Wars. Can you tell us about their space program, when it began, and their position of superiority in space at this time?
Because I told you this document is more than 20 years old, which I brought with me. This document already mentioned preparation for Star War. So I saw the tape of General Graham when he said they started 15 years ago. I like him very much, but he is wrong. They started 25 years ago. I think the problem is for them the high technology. They cannot do everything themselves. They must try to steal as much as possible. And I think the proposal to stop us for 10 years, it is exactly what they need to be ahead of us. Why the Star War bothers them so much on our side and why they want to be ahead is because first time in the history we have some long-term strategy, America, which help us, first of all, I think 4 points. First of all, keep the leading role in the free world and united as with our friends, West Europe and Japan. Secondly, to protect that United States defense. And third, it is to stop the Soviet blackmail. And I think from political point of view, it is very important because they blackmail whole world with the military buildup. And if our Star War will be successful, it is over. And they don't like it. So they don't like two things: defend the United States, they cannot burn us, and secondly, stop the blackmail. If we let them to proceed 10 years and they will stop us, that's it, it is over, you know. And I'm afraid, as I see it, we will probably give up again something, same like Joe mentioned, chemical weapons, when they deceive us and stop the production and they continue. And you can see the example how they lie. They orchestrate the campaign against us, whole world, because they don't have even chemical weapons. In Soviet system, even commander of division has rights to use tactical chemical weapons. Now they invited us to see the factory where they produce it.
Exactly.
I mean, this is, people don't understand that, where is the lie and deception. And same is Star War. You know, Gorbachev already said the most important things is not just the agreement right now about middle-range missiles, but quote all over to Star War. It is absolutely what they want to stop, and I'm afraid maybe it will happen. I think they will do everything possible as they did before already. I can tell you in 1959, when we were in Moscow, and Khrushchev said the best way to improve our technology and military weapons is to steal as much as possible. If I can say a little bit about that, yes. How they steal technology. Since there, I don't say they didn't steal it before, all the time. But satellites got order to select all officers from Air Force, artillery and so, who had already education, technology education. They got 2 years intelligence courses, and all of them are out to steal as much as possible. I tell you, for example, the decision was any minister in charge about chemical industry, radio and so, he got ordered to present that Minister of Defense, who is in charge about military intelligence, and Chief of KGB, a list of things which he like to steal from the West. It was so much, the Minister of Defense and Chief of KGB complained they cannot do any other job than steal the technology. For example, Czechoslovakia, they estimate, when I was there, $300 million a year, just Czechoslovakia.
Stealing from the West, that amount.
Of course, but you have to multiply it once you started produce it, and how much it take us again catch them and go ahead. It is circle, it is non-stop show for us. Mm-hmm. And so finally the Defense Council decided the ministers must present it to State Plan Commission, where is military administration, and they first selected what was strategic importance, which was order from Soviet Union, and what was left was for you. Every day, every year before Christmas was show in the building, by the way, across the residence of the American ambassador in Prague, where they show in 3 big halls, the Minister of Defense and Chief of Secret Police, what was stolen in the West last year, and the Defense Council give them order what they must steal next year. So if somebody say the Brezhnev or Gorbachev, they don't know that, it is absolutely lie, because they give them the order what to steal. And I think now, when Gorbachev want to catch us on the electronic and special high technology, they will steal even more, and especially for the Star War. And I think it is very dangerous. And again, you have some experts in the United States, they tell you, yeah, they steal it, but they cannot produce it anyway. You know, this is stupid. Of course, they cannot do immediately everything, but you know how much they save money for the research and development if they can steal it. For example, the airplane Concorde, the British, Soviets, they had same actually even before, I think. In Czechoslovakia we call it Concordski because everything was stolen from Great Britain and France, what Soviets had, you know.
What is the Soviet strategic capability right now in terms of their strategic posture, and especially from the standpoint of their own Red Shield?
I think they, in many cases, they are ahead front of us because I think Joe is better expert for the technology, but they built already the big station in the space. They say it is like a football field from where they can operate. If they will be able to surprise us with strategic missiles, they are completely able to destroy the United States. As I say, they will destroy us first. I think all satellites participate, especially Czechoslovakia. For example, you can read article where they built even a joint facility in Soviet Union in Moscow, not just scientific but also apartments and everything, where they concentrate all scientists from Warsaw Pact country, and of course also what they can steal. For example, as you know, nuclear bomb, the Joliot-Curie from French, and in United States Rosenbergs and others help them, so they have same opportunity today. And if you see it, it is true Gorbachev want to save some money in the budget to cut maybe budget for the conventional things or the regular things in the military, not save money because he want to give more Soviet people, but because he need this money for Soviet Star War. He told openly the scientists and military, the best things, if our perestroika will be successful, it is the best things for you because we give you the best and the high technology. And again, we are excited because, as I said, the Chief of General Staff is the best peacemaker. We are excited because he want to cut budget. He need the money to improve the living standard of Soviet people. It is baloney. Today the Soviet workers, they got less than before. Where the money goes? Before I defected, can you believe it? The Czechoslovakia spent per capita for military more than United States. Czechoslovakia, all satellites except Romania, they will always rebel. But the others, so now how much Soviet Union? Of course, again, our people, they analyze it and compare it with us. You cannot compare it because in Soviet system you have so-called secret part of budget and secret part of plan. The secret part never goes to Congress, the Soviet, Supreme Soviet. It goes just to Defense Council. Now, when they go to Supreme Soviet, they presented just the official budget, which shows 10% for defense. Poor guys, they don't have anything more. But if they give you the secret part of the budget, you will see where is the how is the price. Plus, of course, they don't have problem to deal with General Motors or General Electric, bargain how much money. There is decision of Defense Council, you must produce such a technology for such a money, and that's it. So for us it's impossible to find out how much they spent for military budget because it is hide everywhere. You know, for example, go to the village and you see the ambulance. The ambulance belongs to military. The chauffeurs of the ambulance are soldiers, military, they are in reserve. Before the war will start, or if they start right now, they just take the ambulance and go to his regiment. So how you can find out all helicopters in the hospital? It is military. How you can find out exactly how much they spent if you are not on the top? And it is same with the Star War, because we are fighting if we can put 10 billion or whatever. Who can challenge it in Soviet Union? If Defense Council decide and spend 50 billion today, they spend it. Nobody can stop it. And this is black on the white, which nobody never asked me before until recently. When they start, and believe or not, 20 years is lots of time, And thanks God, because they didn't have so much opportunity to have the high technology as we have. Otherwise, I don't think they will talk to us anymore about the problem.
There's another very good point that comes out in what he was saying. One of the things that we've seen emphasized among the policy-making circles is how much of a burden the East European countries are for the Soviet Union. No consideration is given to the fact of all the participation and the plans, the work that is done by Eastern Europe for the Soviet Union. That becomes particularly evident when you look at, say, research and development. There's a tendency to think in terms of the Soviets, and when one thinks of the Soviets, the tendency is to think of them as being backward. First of all, that's wrong. What we see is what we see in the commercial area, and the best science and technology tends to go into the military. But what is worse is that our assessments of the U.S. versus the Soviet Union do not take into account the capabilities of Eastern Europe. And anybody who wants to sell the Germans or the Polish or the Czechs short in that regard is making a grave error.
It's true.
Particularly, say, in the chemical and biological area, where the Czechs were world-class microbiologists, the Germans have been world-class organic chemists. The two main fields of biological chemical warfare. And when you look at the publications in military toxicology texts, the people who are saying the most advanced things are the Czechs and the East Germans and the Polish and even some of the Hungarians. And that's what the statements that they were making on those in 1968 were actually more advanced than what you see coming out of the Pentagon in 1987 today, believe it or not.
That is hard to believe.
Yeah, it is what you have exactly here. There will be next 10 years, and this is, as I say, 65, we would have new discovery at the development of the chemical and biological weapons. And they, for example, under the Soviet order in Czechoslovakia, they built a special institute for 60 million for biological weapons, where the Czech scientists, academicians participate. Of course, from Czech budget, Czechoslovak budget. And if somebody think they don't trust these scientists or whatever, maybe they don't give you whole project, they give you part of the project. My friend was already affected by biological weapons in 1964, where they had research on the monkeys, already checked, and I can tell you places in Czechoslovakia where they tested on the goats and dogs, biological and chemical weapons every day. That time we already stopped the production in the United States.
Well, now that we're on the subject of this, CB, will you tell us how they plan to use it? And, we've seen the evening news, Soviets marching through our chemical, biological plants. We march through theirs. And I understand more delegations are coming to look at where we build our rockets. What do you think of all this?
Well, you have so many different uses. We talked about one, like the drugs and narcotics. Another use, we've had chemicals and biologicals actively used against diplomats, attachés, technicians visiting the Soviet Union. Intimidation to get them to do what they want to do or not to do things.
How are they used?
Sabotage, pardon?
How are they used? To influence their minds or to kill them or what?
Yes, all of the above. They've been used in assassinations where somebody's effective, they've actually killed them.
What about Henry Scoop Jackson? Takes a visit to the Soviet Union, comes home, he has a heart attack the next day. Perfectly healthy man.
Many people who visited Soviet Union die on heart attack in the past.
Certainly reports against some British Labour leader, for example, Hugh Gateskill, I believe, who became sick and then died after having tea and crumpets at the Soviet embassy. You've had assassination weapons used against various defectors and emigres and various agents, even in Washington, D.C.
What about the rash of deaths of European scientists?
Certainly not mere coincidence. One would be surprised. It's very, very stark, and you could even say an example of an intimidation, where you have all these, so many prominent East European scientists involved in SDI that suddenly become ill or killed in violent accidents.
For example, sabotage is very important things to use chemical or biological weapons. When I defected, I mentioned the plan for sabotage, which is supposed to be ready by 1972, the network and deliver the material in United States, West Europe. And again, some specialists said it is lie. After then they arrested the Russian spy, KGB spy in Canada. He was there strictly for sabotage. In West Europe, strictly for sabotage. And again, because we don't do that, they cannot do that, you know. And it is very important because, for example, if you take, we discussed the war, how will be controlled the country and so. For example, I tell you the London, Great Britain. In the plan was to poison the water before the war will start in whole London.
How long? Hours, day?
No, exactly minutes before, because
minutes.
you cannot give somebody chance discovered when the missiles will move and airborne troops, the water will be poisoned, because they said they cannot destroy the center of London like Hitler did it by Pfalz, because politically every British will hate you, but they want to destroy the population. So the whole plan was ready, equipment there to poison the water. So again, you are in the situation where everything is integrated to same goal, to have victory over, because you can burn country and you still don't control country. It is what Joe mentioned. But if you paralyze the population, you don't have problem to drop there not big units of airborne troops, and they control very easy the city, the region.
So the poisoning of the water is only to dull them or desensitize them, or is it to kill them?
It could be both. It depends what area is. The Russians still have the working class policy, where it was working class, just poison them. They cannot be called like reserves. Where is bourgeois area, kill them, because as more you kill, as better. So it depends what, if it will be. Probably Washington, I think, thanks God I live in Maryland, maybe I will be not poisoned. But if it will be maybe Los Angeles, because many actors like Paul Newman and the others, they love to fight us against the chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, maybe they decide to let them live, just give them diarrhea or throw up for a while. And no, it is true, you know, it looks like joke, but it is true. They politically orchestrate these things.
Again, they're fighting to win.
Yeah, it is same reason, you know. For
and the biological can be very effective. For example, take an air base. If you are able to introduce, let's say, a flu to an air base, you shut down the air base.
Nobody fly.
And who can say where the flu came from?
Has it already been done?
And airplanes will be yours, you know, after that.
Have they tested this on America with the annual flu that's been going around for years?
There was one particularly significant incident in which that described in the America the Vulnerable, where there was a sensitive command control exercise in the European area, where the troops dispersed to various mobile locations, and one of the mobile locations, mobile nuclear command post, all of a sudden the people became ill, disoriented, and had to shut down operation. It took them about 15 days to determine the approximate cause, which they estimated to be mass LSD intoxication. It took them 15 days to find that out. The place was really shut down in a couple of hours. It gives you an idea of how fast something can happen, and how when it happens, you don't have the capability, but you don't know why or what caused it. And that's one of the frightening things about chemical and biological warfare. You know, it can be used to cripple, to deaden your responses, to make it impossible to respond. But who do you blame it on?
And when you find out, it is too late.
Do you think that was an accurate conclusion, and did it come through the water?
The best, in that particular case, it came through, the best estimates are coffee urine. Now, whether that was contaminated through the water or directly put into the coffee is unknown. But the estimates were that it came through the coffee urine. The water supply in officers' mess in Israel was poisoned by a nerve agent one time, although that has not generally has not been out in the newspapers.
Well, they're insiders, is what you're saying.
In that particular case, it was logically a terrorist insider operation. This is an area, of course, of the chemical and the biological that we haven't gotten into at all, which is its use in terrorism. Terrorism is a highly political act. The United States has been largely spared. There's been some instances where it's been very effective in the Middle East, economically very effective in the Philippines in curtailing fruit sales, in Israel as well. Certainly very effective in Lebanon in forcing the United States out. In Europe, it's been more of a sort of harassment to really cause concern among military bases, make things difficult, but not really be serious enough to cause a major political clampdown among the authorities, and not at all in the United States. Given the situation in which the terrorists actually want to achieve something, given a desire or a, let's say, we reach the stage where people are so acceptable of the kidnappings and the bombings that doesn't quite grant them the headlines they would like. Where do they turn? Well, one possibility is chemical or biological weapons, which are terrifying, quite natural, and indeed are the essence of terror. It was the release of chemical weapons, for example, that's often used in movies to be the sort of supreme form of terrorism. Now, here's a tremendously effective terrorist weapons. You don't need much more than a high school or a college education to be able to whip up your own chemical or biological weapon. Terrorists have been concerned about the possible use. It has been discussed. They have been apprehended in the process of making botulinum toxin in one case, in another case of collecting the chemicals for nerve agents. In another case, some extortionists have manufactured extremely potent chemicals and toxins. One example is the ricin toxin, which a couple of individuals in Massachusetts manufactured. And ricin toxin, in a per weight basis, is about 6 orders of magnitude, as I recall, more toxic than nerve agent. I mean, people can manufacture these things. There's a tremendous potential here in the terrorist area, should their needs become accelerated beyond those of mere explosives and kidnapping.
Well, let's talk about it in conjunction as a supporting element to a first strike, to nuclear war, and even to global war, as you mentioned when we were talking.
Tremendous example. You can have something like these employed by terrorists, presumably independent of guidance, as well as by special forces operations. You can use simple things to tie up traffic and create mammoth traffic jams in key logistics areas. This has happened in the past.
Yeah, just 1 second. It is typical example which I saw myself in the planning. For example, blew up tunnels. Where is the major traffic? It is what Joe say. First of all, you stop the traffic. Secondly, you make people mad because you can use the sabotage for many different purposes.
If you have a sudden onslaught of a new strain of flu across the United States, carefully let loose so it looks like a natural spread, but a very rapid spread, which is explainable because it's a new subtype culture, something like that. You have a massive flu epidemic. How are you going to go to war?
Has it happened already?
I wouldn't know. I hope not, but I don't know.
I'd like to get you to give us a concise statement on your opinion of how global war would take place, beginning with that first strike capacity and the carrying of it out.
Would you like this in 1 minute or 2?
5 will do.
I like the scenario where there is a crisis situation.
For example?
The Soviets implement another blockade of Berlin, and we have a U.S. president that says, well, we're going to go into Berlin, and they fly some planes in, the planes get shot down, and they keep accelerating measures, and finally it looks to the Soviets as though the U.S. president doesn't understand that they're in control, and they're going to have to accelerate it, and so they decide to go to war. And you could have a crisis over, say, something like that. It really is hard to develop a scenario. I've often thought if you want a scenario, the best thing is to go to the past and to take 2 or 3 situations when the threat of war actually was present. And then you can really gain a situation that is credible, and then you just cause an event to change and make that leap into war credible. There have been 2 or 3 times, say, in the 60s when, or perhaps even late 50s, when the possibility of war was a real war. I think one good example would be the Berlin Wall, and that's through a large number of miscalculations that people didn't understand what was happening when things got mixed up, and what was supposed to be a rather simple event turned into a very complex event. I think there was one case that everybody was so confused over what happening, and things were mixed up to the extent that that could have exploded into a war. Another time was when there was talk during the Vietnam War of the bombing or possible mining of Haiphong Harbor, when the Soviets were concerned of attack on subs, and that might lead to war.
So the Soviets will bide their time until their desire for war is great enough, and they'll either use
a concern that it will escalate to war,
or they'll use a crisis, or they'll create a crisis.
No, that's the point.
Yeah, and then defuse it, perhaps artificially, and then go to war on a surprise.
I tell you, for example, it was, I'm sorry, Joe, the example, very serious planning when the conflict between China and Soviet Union started and it escalated. It was planning that the Soviets can drop even small nuclear bomb somewhere in Siberia and say Chinese started the war, and have reason to burn the major Chinese city. So it is same, they can create such a situation. It is what, if somebody says Soviets are just opportunists, it is absolutely stupid, because they create the opportunity. I don't say all of them, but most of them. And we are talking about a global war. It is really the truth. They cannot exactly say this will happen 1989, because they are not God to direct that whole war. But they have such a scenario. For example, they believe if inflation is more than 22%, it is good situation for a revolution or such a act. Or if the West will completely collapse, the masses will go against the so-called bourgeois government. So there are many thinkings and many scenarios when this can happen. And of course, if they are talking about global war, I forgot to mention in the beginning when we were talking about strategy, they think to use the military forces 4 different ways. First is liquidate home so-called counter-revolution. It was Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Second is to give help, direct or indirect help, revolution forces, which is direct help is Afghanistan, Angola, Mozambique, Castro. Indirect help is supported terrorists, guerrillas in Salvador and so. And 4, which is most important, is global war. If it will be global war, nobody will be missed. For example, I talked to people from, officials from Switzerland or Sweden, and they thought because they are neutral, nobody will touch them. Can you imagine the Soviets will forget in the socialistic Europe, small capitalistic island Sweden or Switzerland, where is the best technology, and mineral resources in Sweden, for example. So this is crazy. Once they make decision global war, there's no question about that. They will use everything possible to liquidate first United States, and after then depends what, as they call it, zone it is, if it is Central America or Africa or whatever, Middle East, take care about the different part of the zones. And you must understand one thing, compared to Hitler, for example, who had problem because not in every country was the larger group of Nazis, fascists, who can help him to control the country, the Soviets have communist parties everywhere. They are there. You know, if they move to West Germany, they know who will be the mayor of Bonn, who will be the premier minister today if they move in. Because if you, for example, go to Czechoslovakia and you take the so-called Department for Special Propaganda, it is cover name for the department which orchestrates deception, disinformation, and prepare everything for the war. If you go to that warehouses, you have the coupons in German language for German population to buy bread, milk, and so and so. It is ready. If you say so, again, you are crazy. You have there documentation of the military court where, for example, Franz Joseph Strauss got death penalty because he is revanchist or whatever. So these things you have ready today and update every day. So if we are talking about global war, again, it is not just drop nuclear weapons, not just use sabotage in the United States or West Germany. It goes up to the end how the territory will be controlled and by whom.
The crisis is a particularly ominous time to start one, particularly a crisis of capitalism. The reason one would suspect that, in addition to what General Sejna was saying, is in their literature they talk about the crisis as being the time when the U.S. would lash out in a last-ditch attempt to save capitalism. And of course that providing the matrix for saying basically a crisis is a good time to attack when the West is least prepared and least able to counter that. Of course, again, given your own belief that you will be successful and your own capabilities are sufficiently strong that you can be successful.
Well, like, for instance, a crisis would be the assassination of the president. That kind of a moment.
I tell you, in for example, Czechoslovakia, these details I don't know about the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union, they give, for example, each satellite special responsibility, where you have best possibility. For example, Czechoslovakia, West Germany, Austria, France, Italy, and Latin America, because Czechoslovakia was very much known in whole world already before World War II. At least everybody knows Czechoslovak machine guns. Plus Czechoslovakia had more, I don't say that because I'm from there, but more educated people than, let's say, Romania, which was an underdeveloped country at the time. So it is why they exploited large Czechoslovakia. And the Czechoslovak Spetsnaz, which under the military counterintelligence, they had exactly names who must be arrested, who must be killed immediately. After then, officially court give him death penalty. You know, so again, all these things are done, and these are not the major things to kill the Chancellor of West Germany or Chief of Police in Bonn. This is relatively very small things, but the Spetsnaya, which is prepared for that Bonn, they know what is their duty. And you can see again, as Joe say, go to the always examples. Look at Afghanistan. What happened? The Afghan president, Amin, supposed to invite them to Afghanistan.
Supposedly.
He was the first who was killed. You know, it was simple like that. Why we don't learn from these things? If you look at Czechoslovakia, where they supposed to be invited by Politburo, the Politburo was first who were arrested and taken to Soviet Union. You know, so these are examples which show us how it works and how it will work. Of course, in the United States, major responsibility of Soviet Union satellites participate, but the main leader is Soviet Union.
Czechoslovakia is a real good example because on the invasion there you had the special forces that came in, seized the airport, seized all the officials, seized the military command control, seized the radio and TV networks, and caused disinformation to be broadcast there, the government to be totally controlled, the military basically dismembered, and the Air Force put out a commission. Then you had the troops marching in. Very effective employment of the disinformation deception coupled with special forces operations and political actions. You'd have the same thing as the start of a nuclear war.
Nation by nation.
Yeah.
Right. Every single one.
Can you give us an anatomy of the globe of which nations, cities, territories would receive what kind of treatment? Nuclear war, conventional troops, chemical, biological warfare? How do they map out what they do with America or the rest of the planet?
Well, it definitely is a global war you're talking about. And you're talking about all aspects of the globe.
I thought you were talking about it.
Which we're talking about. The attack is not only against any forces that can oppose the Soviet Union, and U.S. forces independent of where they are, whether they're in Australia, the Philippines, Spain, England.
So U.S. forces, bases everywhere on Earth
are taken out. Absolutely.
Immediately taken out.
Right.
Absolutely.
You would probably have, special forces from the satellites and Soviets going into the Middle East to control the Middle East.
Well, it depends, your question, it depends what city it is, what importance, because the most important things for them are military headquarters, warehouses of chemical nuclear weapons. It is number one for Sejna and other attacks by missiles. Administrative centers, a large population which can be used for take the reserve, transport system and energy. So again, it depends what city it is. If we are talking about Washington, it is no question about that. The first missiles will fly there because it is the headquarters of the free world. And after then you have to go to other cities if you want to completely demoralize the United States with large population, New York, San Francisco, and the others. There are lots of human being reserved for ore production or call to the war. And after then you have the electric power station, gas station, and harbors. It is, I told you, each such an imported city or targets is put to three different categories. Category number one, which must be destroyed by or nuclear weapons or whatever missiles, and sabotage to be absolutely sure it was liquidated, it doesn't exist anymore. Some others just by missiles or air force, and third just by sabotage. For example, as I told you, they don't want if let's say in France the factory Simca or whatever is destroyed, but they want to stop the production. So what they will destroy by sabotage is the electric supply to the factory and forget the factory. So this go to details. It is what the agents who are in United States and Europe, which they make update what is in that area, what is in that city, to be sure the targets was really hit and destroyed.
Are some of these Spetsnaz forces in the cities who have to attend to this, are they then sacrificed when the bombs come? Do they know they'll be sacrificed?
I don't think so. I was not in Spetsnaz, but if I will be, I will think twice. What is my mission, especially some targets? But some of them you have them already here for the sabotage because it will be too late. In Europe, you can drop many of them by parachutes and so, but in United States, you have to be ready before it will start, but have them on the place. If they want
do you have any estimate of how many Spetsnaz special forces are in the United States today in position?
Not United States.
Canada?
No, because Czechoslovakia was not in charge. It was strictly Soviet business. But in Europe, West Germany, and
how many in West Germany?
In West Germany, the Czechoslovakia, because there also participate others, Hungarians and Soviets. We had the part of the West Germany where the Czech front will march. It was your responsibility to destroy it. We had there 63 agents who were there to organize the network. He was just the boss, and from the communists and other people which they were able to recruit. He organized the groups which will take care about the American warehouses of nuclear weapons on that area, chemical weapons and other places. So it's...
There was also a Soviet agent that defected in roughly 1971 to Great Britain, who was in charge of one set of sabotage nets in Great Britain that basically confirmed that in terms of the number of targets and people in Great Britain. The targets read like a list of the targets you would expect. Early warning radars, command and control, access to nuclear facilities, that type of thing.
I had many friends who were selected to actually my former employees, because many people to use for sabotage were when Soviets decided to go to this business, were used for engineer troops, because they already have some training with explosive material and others. So I had many friends who were selected for this business, first established the headquarters and after then trained the cadres, as they call it. Plus they just don't train your own people. You have very large budget, you train the foreigners in Czechoslovakia and other countries for sabotage. Of course they train the fighters for freedom. They don't train people for sabotage, and they train them for commanders, they train them simple people who will provide the sabotage, but mostly the leaders. And lots of them, for example, in Czechoslovakia were from Latin America. And they from Latin America, Colombia, Guatemala, wherever, flew to Austria or Sweden. There you give him a Czechoslovak passport. He goes to Czechoslovakia for training. You take him back, and he flew back to Mexico, and he was never in Czechoslovakia. So this goes on every year in special places where the GRU and KGB train these people.
Now you were talking about the uses of nuclear weapons versus chemicals, depending on the concentration of population, the farming or open areas in this country.
Concentration of the population and importance, let's say in Europe, of the city, of the industry, in United States, generally population, to, if we are talking about chemical, biological weapons, to create panic, to create situation where we cannot mobilize the resources, where people will go protest and ask government to stop war, which is sabotage for political purpose, they call it, because you have many different reasons for sabotage, and very important is for political purpose. And they believe they will be created in United States salvation or committees, salvations committee, which will actually deceive American people. If we stop it, we will be friendly, we let the Soviets, we will survive. And they believe most people who will be still in life, they will accept it, because the biological and chemical weapons will create such a bad situation. Nobody will think how to fight the Russian, everybody will think how to survive. And pick up some politicians who will accept it, which I think the film America show it a little bit, and I tell you honestly, I don't think they would have many problems to pick up such a people, such a politician in the United States, as I see it today, who will be able to do that and happy to do that for the Soviets. This is scenario for United States, salvation committees in the center in Washington, in different states, and they will orchestrate actually in the right words, capitulation of United States.
You were mentioning using chemicals in the faraway places of the woods where the rebels hide out.
What we have seen, say, in Afghanistan and Southeast Asia and other places such as Yemen, for example, or Ethiopia, is the use of chemical agents, or it could be biological, in regions that are very difficult to control militarily, where you have hard terrain to work in, where you have remote villages, wooded areas, areas with caves, mountainous terrain, where the advantage goes to the indigenous people, the people who know the area. One of the scenarios for war, the common scenario for war in the United States is, well, the people will just go to the woods and the Soviets will never be able to roust them out, so to speak. And I say, well, we've seen the way in which they will roust them out in Afghanistan, Southeast Asia. You just inundate the forest areas, the hideaway areas, if you will, with chemical or biological agents. It takes relatively little agent and a very, very small plane, such as a crop duster, flying crosswind to blanket a mammoth area with biological agents. Matter of fact, flying one plane along the Canadian border, you would probably, under the right wind conditions, be sufficient to blanket the United States. The degree of coverage of these things can be tremendous. You have control problems, but in the situation that we're talking about, or weather problems, in the situation you're talking about, though, you have more than ample capability to fly where you want, when you want, and as low as you want to take advantage of the wind conditions and wreak havoc.
Yeah, plus if you look at it, if you look at Soviet territory and you look at our territory and West Europe, the concentration of population in such areas, and if you look at the Soviet plan for Czechoslovak for evacuation, where all the coal mine, the old tunnels, everything is exploited to use it for evacuation and population. Where you will evacuate Washington? To Baltimore and Baltimore to Washington, or how you will do that? You know, people cannot even make it. Go to forest, okay, maybe in Montana is a nice place to be evacuated, but if you go to forest, it is what Joe said, they kill you anyway. So what is the point for us? Again, they have some advantage, Soviet Union, about the territory, the deception, surprise, and all these things.
One of the real things, to come back to the SDI, that's important, that I'd like to underscore. You have this sort of spreading defeatism within the United States. Yes. The idea that nuclear war is impossible, it's no good, you can't do anything. If you start to develop a program such as the President described in '83 and as General Graham has said is eminently possible, you start to work on something like this and you start to understand that you don't have to be totally vulnerable, that you can do a great deal to thwart the attack plans, to preserve your own assets. Right. You stand to create a whole renovation of thinking within the United States, within the people, within the military-industrial complex, so that people will say, hey, you know, there's something that can be done. Yeah. We don't have to be sitting ducks. What you then tend to do is give the United States the opportunity to go back on the initiative, to, if you will, if you might say so, to regain the strategic initiative, to be more master of our own destiny as opposed to merely reacting the way in which the Soviets want us to react. And I think this is one of the great fears of the Soviet Union, that you'll find this defeatism killed, that people will stand up and say, hey, you know, you aren't going to take over our way of life, you're not going to destroy it, take over our country, you're not going to intimidate us, because your nuclear weapons, you know, they're bad, but we're back to the way situations were before, where you're not going to get away scot-free, you're not going to be able to totally destroy us, because you can't take out our missile systems, and because we're going to be able to keep enough survivability to ensure that you won't be able to do that. And at the same time,
I think what Joe said, to demoralize people and make it hopeless. It is very important part of Soviet deception and strategy. And I must say they were very successful, not just in the United States, but Europe. If you look at one part of the military build-up for political pressure, most people in Europe, they are scared, and they think they are hopeless. They are not. If all people go together and supported one country each other and came to conclusion what we can do, I think it will change whole atmosphere, whole moral profile of the people.
What hope do you see for that happening here in Washington? We'd really like to know who's listening and who's willing to take their position in Congress and start ABM and defense.
Joe listened to me and I listened to him.
You have a cake. A French writer published a book a few years ago, which I think is tremendously worth all our reading, Ravel's How Democracies Perish. And it really speaks to this point and to the absence of anybody willing to stand up and be heard. You have a few stalwart souls in Congress, but not many and not on a consistent basis. It's very difficult to see anybody that's willing to consistently swim against the tide to stand up and speak for what he believes in, particularly when he's liable to be slaughtered by the media and suspects that leads to his non-re-election in the next campaign.
Well, supposing you do have such an individual, the next problem you have is who's willing to listen to this person?
Well, even before that, an individual can't accomplish very much unless he's master of his own ship and is able to bring in people who also understand the problem and are willing to work with it. And I think the problem we have had is bringing in people or seeing people come into elective office and then see the direction of the ship of state not change at all but continue on its former course because the people he brought in were unwilling to share his philosophy with him.
Well, is there any hope for this happening in America from your viewpoint?
No.
You don't see any hope for the change coming about in the United States?
I don't see any. I'm looking for it. I continue to work to try to find it. I would like to be a part of it. But in terms of do I see it happening? No. I think one of the greatest disappointments over the past 7 years is we haven't seen something like that happen. That's my perception sitting in Washington.
You know, they are good people. It is not true. They are not. I know friends, Joe knows friends. But these people are in defensive. Who is in offensive are the liberals. And for example, if you will be in U.S. government or work for like analyst or consultant like Dr. Douglas and they give you the stamp points of Cold War, that's it. You know, you can say many things, some people even are worried to read it because you are the Cold War and it is the tragedy.
You are suspicious if you speak along these lines.
You are anti-communist.
You are anti-communist.
And what is worse than being anti-communist?
You know, I watched what is the show, Donahue show, where he attacked Brzezinski. He said, what do you accept that from this man who is anti-Soviet, who is anti-communist? I was waiting what he say, what is wrong about that. He didn't say, he presented him like a devil because he is anti-communist and anti-Soviet. If he will go there and say how Gorbachev is fantastic and we should be friends, it is fine. But because you say no, he is same bastard like the others, you are wrong.
Good example. Take the publication area. There's a book that was published on November 20th called Mesmerized by the Bear. It's a sequence of about 14 or 15 chapters on Soviet deception and how effective it is in a wide variety of areas from space to religion. It was edited by Colonel Sleeper, who used to be with Air Force Intelligence and has long been a study of this communist movement and Marxism-Leninism. The individual authors are a wide variety of people. I happen to author one of the chapters myself. A number of people who have had a wide-ranging amount of contact with various elements of deception. The publishers Dodd Mead, they published 5,000 copies of the book, which is, you know, we got it up to 5,000 by begging them to print more and more. I'm sure nobody has heard about it until now. Also in November, just coincidentally, Harper & Row is publishing a book by Mikhail Gorbachev called Perestroika. The announcement in the paper indicated they were publishing 200,000 copies of the book. They've had full-page advertisements in
Right.
nearly every major newspaper across the country. You know, get this book, the book of the year written by the statesman of the year. It is the most brilliant example of Soviet deception and disinformation that I've ever read. It is sophisticated. If you look at the Soviet deception, you start off with basically chapter 1, which is Lenin's new economic plan in the 1920s. And this is when he showed how Soviet Union was tending toward capitalism. It wanted to let the seeds of capitalism grow. It presented the image of the Soviet Union as not a threat, as forsaking its path, and inviting U.S. and Western industry in to help this fledgling young country. It was eminently successful, and it lasted until they decided to crack down. The time had come for the starvation of the Ukraine and the purges that were internal to the Soviet Union. The whole scenario was replayed in 1950, in the middle 1950s, when Khrushchev came, and to get communism back on course, decided they had to change the image of communism in the Soviet Union as seen in the West, to suggest that communism was changing, to show that capitalism could grow, that there wasn't only one path to socialism, that many paths were possible, including the democratic process. And they loosened the ties on culture, and people could write again. They brought some people back from the Gulag. And this was peaceful coexistence, really designed to get economic trade and assistance to help the Soviet Union more rapidly speed us to the grave. What we are seeing today is the third series, or actually the third series, I guess you'd say, was détente. And that was in the 70s, when under the guise of détente and peaceful coexistence, the Soviets intensified the revolutionary warfare around the country, gained nuclear superiority, caused the United States to slack off in its own drive for military forces and capabilities, and indeed gleaned tremendous military, technical, and economic assistance from the West. That was ended sort of in the early 80s, and now you have complete rebirth now in perestroika. The restructuring, which really applies to the whole world. It's the restructuring of the world.
Restructuring of what? From what angle?
Everything.
Everything.
Including, they say, the whole world, the capitalist system must be restructured.
But you have to understand the language in the book to read it. If you don't understand the subtleties in the book, you miss all that. Because you read the word peace and you think they're talking about peace.
Why don't you give us a glossary of terms and what they mean to the Soviets?
Well, peace is a good example. Peace is not as you and I know it. Peace is the state that can exist after capitalism has been totally destroyed.
Yeah.
The arms race is not competition between the Soviet and the United States, as defined in the political dictionary. The arms race is the ever-increasing acquisition of arms by the imperialists. That's almost a verbatim quote. The weapons that are threatening, the only weapons that are threatening are the Western weapons. The Soviet weapons threaten no one.
They are for peace.
They are for peace.
Which is the destruction of the imperialists.
Now these things, they seem humorous, and they are in a sense when we're put face to face with them in this context. But when you encounter them in the Soviet literature, they are not artificial, they're not humorous, they are deadly serious. And that's the way they are presented in this book. The book is masterful. It is very much against the possibility of nuclear war. What they have done in this book is actually, I believe, is they've gone back through all the anti-communist writings over the past decade. They've analyzed them carefully and identified what are the points that people are telling their own citizens about that we have got to stop to continue our battle most effectively. And they have taken those points and they have addressed every single one in this book in the most sophisticated and effective manner.
Gorbachev had two speeches this month. And again, if you look at it, what our media presented us, it is just peace, it is just fine guy, it is almost like none. They wouldn't tell you the other parts where he say, our policy was very effective in the past, but in many cases we were not tough enough against our opponents. So where is this angel? What he means they were not effective or tough enough. Now he tell you other things. The perestroika, the reconstruction, means new red revolution.
New red revolution.
New red revolution. The importance is same like was red revolution, even more important. What he means from the, it means he will kiss us or what? You know, so these are statements which are clear. Polish leader, the late Girek, he was absolutely honest. He talked to military forces, Air Force, and he said, comrades, we are not fighting for any peace. We are fighting for socialistic peace. It is exactly what Joe said, because it is statement of Khrushchev. He said, it cannot be peace since capitalists exist. So about what we are talking here is absolutely clear what they want, what they have in their mind. Destroy the free world. That's all, because it bothers them. If they don't have United States, they will be fine.
The United States is the fly in the ointment, which is free will. Free will really is their fly in the ointment. I wanted to ask you about your statement that you made regarding our leadership saying that the Soviet Union will never destroy the United States. They want to take our factories intact, our homes, our buildings, our cities, our agriculture. They want this, they want the good life, they want our materialism. Do you agree with that or not?
The Soviets want materialism?
That they do not wish to destroy the United States, they want to take us intact.
It is absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong. If they want to destroy somebody, first will be United States. I can tell you from my 18 years experience, nothing bothers them so much like United States. You don't have any decision of Defense Council or Politburo which is related to foreign policy and especially strategy, where you don't have paragraph how this will damage United States, you know, in the peacetime. I'm not talking about wartime, which is no question about it. The Soviet missiles will fly first here, because as I say, you don't have to be military strategist, and you know you must destroy the strongest opponent. And I tell you the truth, it is true they are scared about the United States for two reasons. Since we have strategic weapons, and it is why whole approach of Soviet policy is to liquidate our strategic weapons, doesn't matter if submarines or missiles or today's Star War. And second, it is the image of United States. From political point of view, it bothers them so much. I tell you, and it is true, because thanks US government, I traveled almost in the whole world. And I tell you, I never find one person in poorest countries who ever asked me to help him emigrate to Soviet Union. Hundreds people ask you how to emigrate to United States, because America is image, America is hope for freedom, democracy, opportunity. And it is just one America, you can do what you want. If people don't have this hope and this opportunity, they don't have anything. And I think it is our highest responsibility not let anybody destroy this hope, not just for American people.
I had a delightful conversation one time with some acquaintances from the Institute of the USA in Canada in Moscow who were visiting, came over for a debate, and I was a member of the US delegation at this gathering at Freedom Foundation in Valley Forge. And we got it on a discussion of the two cultures, and I made the point that the strength of the United States was its freedom. Freedom this, freedom that. We have a free society. It's sort of natural to us. And his response was this: yes, we have to learn how to constrain those freedoms.
Who made that statement?
I believe it was the son of Arbatov,
Head
of the Institute of the USA and Canada.
US and Canada.
Another interesting insight into the Soviet perspective, I got into an argument a few years earlier with a former military officer, Colonel Coolidge, who was then in the Institute of the USA and Canada and now was in a different socialist institute. It was over ideology, and we had a very strong argument. And finally, in frustration, he said, "We will meet here again in 200 years and see who is right." Very long-term perspective. It says something about their plan, their action, their beliefs, and the importance of ideology, too, which many people in the United States would like to think is dead.
They would like to think it, so they do. Now, you were mentioning the Soviets have to destroy the United States. Do they have to destroy Canada along with it in this first strike?
May I put a different perspective on this destruction? And the problem with the destruction is we think again too often in terms of a vernacular that's developed in U.S. strategy like mutual assured destruction, or burn all the factories, all the cities. When you look at Soviet strategic writings, you don't see any emphasis really placed on those words. It's not the way they think. They're thinking in terms of military missions to be accomplished. And there's generally, as I recall, it's been a long time since I really worked in that area, but as I recall, there's sort of 5 key missions, and the first one would be the destruction of military forces. The second one was the destruction of the political administrative organs. Third was the destruction of military forces. Third was the disorganization of the interior. And fourth was a demoralization of the population, or fifth. So, those are missions. Now, none of them are saying destroy the country. They're missions which are then applied, each one with the forces. Now, rather than say, well, are they going to destroy everything in looking at the United States vis-a-vis Europe, the question is, do they care about the destruction that's associated with the completion of the military missions? And in the case of Europe, they say, well, we don't want to destroy it any more than is absolutely necessary because we want to seize it. We want to use those assets. We want to actually usurp those assets to help our own recovery from the war. In the case of the United States, you do not see any argument like that. It's not that they're out to, destroy, to burn the whole United States. That would be wasteful expenditure of weapons. What they're out to do is accomplish those strategic missions that will lead to the seizure and the capture of the strategic initiative and the consummation of the main military missions. Now, if they accomplish those, then they want to accomplish those in the most effective and the efficient manner, so as again to preserve their own military capability. If they can accomplish that using 1,000 nuclear weapons rather than 2,000, they would do that because that means they have saved 1,000 nuclear weapons to use in controlling the whole world afterwards. So I think it's better to look at destruction in that light in looking at the attack on the United States. To the extent weapons come along that are more effective than nuclear weapons to take out certain targets and more efficient, they would do that. Because to them, the nuclear weapon is not an absolute weapon. Their image is a combined arms image in which all forces and means are used to accomplish the objective. And they'll use the most effective and efficient weapons in the best military manner.
Where does Canada come in their focus on the U.S.?
Now, I really haven't seen Canada mentioned very often, if at all, in Soviet military writings.
Canada, they try to do everything possible. I had opportunity to meet some Canadian delegation, parliament, and so they do everything possible to split Canada from United States by deception and everything, active measures, everything what is possible. It is no question about that. They will, if they hit United States, if we are talking global war, they will hit our bases, they will hit Canadians' missiles or whatever is dangerous for them, but not as much populations and city like United States.
You end up hitting cities in the United States because of command control centers.
Yeah.
Washington is the single main command control center. Next to that, you're going to have Omaha. You're going to have to hit Pittsburgh because it's a major switching network for AT&T, which is how we depend on communications. You'll hit Norfolk because it's a major, submarine base, major naval base. You hit San Diego for the same reason, Seattle for the same reason, San Francisco Bay for the same reason. And you'll have a lot of casualties as a result. But it's not going after them just to produce casualties. It's going after them for very specific military missions.
Yeah. Eliminate our possibility to take strategic initiative and destroy them. It is the most important things. And whatever serve for that purpose, they do that.